Elvis Presley sold over 1 billion records. That's the story we've heard for decades. It's a number so big it feels unreal. And maybe it is. The official record keepers in the United States, the RIA, have certified sales of around 146.5 million albums. That's a huge number. It makes him one of the best-selling artists of all time. But it's not 1 billion. It's not even close. So where does the billion-dollar claim come from? And what about the hundreds of gold, platinum, and multi-platinum awards that line the halls of Graceland? He earned many of them while he was alive, no doubt. But a huge number of them appeared after he died on August 16, 1977. They keep appearing even today. It's new certifications for albums released over 60 years ago. It makes you wonder. How can an album from 1956 suddenly go triple platinum in 2022? How do they count records sold before computers, before barcode scanners, when records were often sent to stores and nobody knew if they were sold or just sitting in a dusty backroom? This isn't about taking away from his talent. It's about understanding the machine behind the legend. The music business is, after all, a business. And in business, numbers matter. They build legacies. They sell box sets. They keep the legend alive. But are the numbers real? Are the awards authentic representations of what people were actually buying, or are they tools of marketing shaped by changing rules and clever accounting? We are going to look at the lingering questions. The ones that sit in the back of your mind when you see another headline about Elvis breaking another record decades after he left the building. Number 17, how does a Spotify stream in 2024 become a gold record from 1956? It's a strange thought. You're listening to Jailhouse Rock on your phone. It's part of a playlist you made for a road trip. You didn't buy an album. You didn't even consciously choose to listen to that specific song. It just came on. Yet, that simple act, that stream, is now part of the calculation for an award that was created to honor the sale of physical records. This is perhaps the most modern and confusing part of the posthumous awards puzzle. The rules of the game have completely changed. The RIA, the Recording Industry Association of America, is the body that hands out gold and platinum certifications in the United States. For a long time, the math was simple. One album sold equals one unit counted. To get a gold record, an artist needed to sell 500,000 albums. For platinum, it was 1 million. Simple. But then the music world changed. People stopped buying CDs. They started downloading songs, and then they started streaming them. The RIA had to adapt or become irrelevant. In 2013, they started counting on demand streams from services like YouTube and Spotify towards single certifications. Then, in 2016, they did the same for albums. This was a massive shift. They came up with a new kind of math. It's called Stream Equivalent Albums, or SEA. The rule is this 1,500 on-demand audio or video streams of songs from an album equal one album sale. It also counts track downloads, where 10 song downloads equal one album sale. This is called Track Equivalent Albums, or TEA. So, when a song like Can't Help Falling in Love goes viral on TikTok or gets featured in a popular movie, the streams skyrocket. Millions of people are listening to it. The RIA bundles up those streams. Every 1,500 listens counts as one sale of the album it originally appeared on, which for that song would be the Blue Hawaii soundtrack from 1961. This means an album can rack up sales and earn a new certification without a single physical copy leaving a warehouse. This is a huge factor in Elvis's modern awards. Take his album ELV1F's 30 Own Hits, released in 2002. It was a massive success on its own, but its certification level keeps climbing. It was certified 6X Platinum in 2018. A huge part of that jump comes from streams. Every time someone streams Suspicious Minds or In the Ghetto, it contributes to that album's total, right? The RIA doesn't differentiate. A unit is a unit. Whether it was a vinyl record sold in 1969 or 1,500 streams in 2023. But does this feel authentic? The original intent of a gold record was to celebrate a specific moment in time when 500,000 people went to a store and chose to buy a physical object. It was a direct transaction, a conscious choice to own that collection of music. Streaming is different. It's often passive. It's part of a subscription. It blurs the line between a dedicated purchase and a casual listen. It allows for the same popular songs to be counted over and over again, boosting the sales of multiple compilations at once. The system is designed for modern artists who release albums where every track is available for streaming. Applying it retroactively to a career that ended before the internet was even invented feels. So while the math is technically correct, according to today's rules, it raises a fundamental question about what these awards actually represent. They no longer just represent sales, they represent engagement, and for an artist with a catalog as timeless and as frequently used in pop culture as Elvis, that engagement is perpetual. It ensures his numbers will never stop growing long after the last record has been pressed. What we still don't know, if a song's popularity on a social media app can create a gold record, what does the word gold even mean anymore? Are we retroactively applying modern listening habits to historical achievements, fundamentally changing their context? Could an artist become diamond certified decades after their death without a single new person buying their album? How many of Elvis's recent certifications are from actual sales versus these bundled up streams? Number 16, are we just counting the same handful of hits over and over again? Think about how many Elvis Presley compilations exist. There's Elvis's Golden Records. There's Worldwide 50 Gold Award Hits Volume 1. There's the Top 10 Hitses. There's ELV1S 31 Hitses. There's the Essential Elvis Presley. The list is endless, and almost all of them contain the same core group of songs: Hound Dog, Don't Be Cruel, Jailhouse Rock, Love Me Tender, Suspicious Minds, Can't Help Falling in Love. These songs are titans of music history. They have been bought and rebought by generations of fans. This brings up a tricky question of authenticity. When a new compilation is released and it goes platinum, is that a new achievement? Or is it just a testament to the staying power of the same 20 or 30 songs? The RIA certifies each album as a unique product. So, Elvis's Golden Records, released in 1958, is certified 6x platinum. ELV1S 30 Yon Hits, released in 2002, is also certified 6x platinum. Both albums contain many of the same songs. Someone who bought the first album in the 60s might have bought the second one on CD in the 2000s. The RIA counts that as two separate sales, contributing to two separate awards. This is not unique to Elvis. Many legacy artists, from Frank Sinatra to the Beatles, have multiple greatest hits packages. But the sheer volume and relentless repackaging of Elvis's catalog is on another level. This strategy was baked into his career from the beginning. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, was a master of maximizing profit from existing material. Why spend money recording a new album when you can put the old hits in a new sleeve and sell them all over again? This philosophy was supercharged after Elvis's death. His estate and the various record labels that have owned his catalog, RCA, BMG, Sony Music, have become experts at this. They release a compilation for Valentine's Day Elvis love songs. They release one for Christmas, the classic Christmas album. They release a gospel collection where No One Stands Alone. They release a box set with a fancy booklet and a few outtakes. Each one is a new product in the eyes of the RIA. Each one starts its own certification journey from zero. And because the core material is so strong, many of them sell very well. The 2002 ELV1S's compilation is a perfect case study. You know, it was a marketing masterpiece. The A Little Less Conversation remix by JXL became a global hit. It introduced Elvis to a new generation. The album sold millions. But how many of those sales were from new fans, and how many were from existing fans who were simply buying the hits for the fifth time in a new format? The RIA doesn't ask that question. Their job is to certify sales of a specific product. If Sony creates a new product and ships 1 million copies that are sold to customers, that product is platinum. It doesn't matter if the songs on it are already on 10 other platinum albums in the same catalog. This practice can make an artist's total sales figures look bigger than the actual number of people buying their music. It's like if a car company sold the same engine in 10 different car models and then claimed they sold 10 times the number of engines. It's technically true, but it doesn't give you the full picture. It inflates the numbers by counting the appeal of the same core assets multiple times. So when we look at the wall of awards, we have to ask what we are celebrating. Are we celebrating 100 different albums, or are we celebrating the incredible, enduring popularity of a few dozen songs packaged and sold in 100 different ways? What we still don't know how many unique households in America actually own an Elvis record versus the total number of albums sold. If you removed all the compilations and only counted studio albums, movie soundtracks, and live albums, what would his total certified sales be? Is there any other artist in history whose catalog has been repackaged and resold as many times as Elvis's? Does the RIAA ever consider the overlap in material when looking at an artist's overall legacy certification? Number 15, what is a unit shipped and does it equal a record sold? This question gets to the very heart of how the music industry has always counted success. It seems simple. To get a gold record, you have to sell 500,000 albums. But the key word is sell. Who has to buy it, the fan in the record store? Or the record store itself? For most of the RIAA's history, the awards were based on units shipped from the record company to distributors and stores, minus any returns. This is a crucial distinction. The process worked like this. A record label, like RCA, would press a new Elvis album. They would then sell it to wholesale distributors, who in turn would sell it to record stores like Tower Records or small mom and pop shops. The RIAA's initial certification was often based on the number of units shipped to those distributors and stores. The assumption was that stores wouldn't order records they couldn't sell. To get a gold award, an album needed to ship 500,000 units and have a retail value of at least $1 million at the time, a rule that was later dropped. The problem is, shipping a record to a store is not the same as a person buying it. Stores could, and often did, return unsold records to the label for a credit. The RIAA had rules about this. A record label had to wait a certain period, usually 60 days, after an album's release before they could apply for certification to allow time for initial returns to come in. The label had to provide a certification from an independent accountant stating that the net shipments shipped minus returned met the required threshold. But this system had loopholes. A record label could launch a massive promotional push, shipping huge quantities of an album to stores all across the country. They could apply for and receive a gold or platinum award very quickly, generating headlines and buzz. This buzz could then drive actual sales. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. The award itself became a marketing tool. Later on, many of those records might be returned if they didn't sell, but the award was already on the wall. The RIAA did conduct audits, but the system was largely based on the numbers provided by the record labels themselves. This was especially relevant in the 70s, a period of massive sales and sometimes questionable accounting practices across the industry. For an artist as big as Elvis, the pressure to have every new album go gold instantly was immense. The book Elvis: What Happened, by his former bodyguards, published just before his death in 1977, touches on the immense pressure from RCA and Colonel Parker to keep the hits coming and the sales numbers high. After Elvis died, this system became even more complex. RCA was suddenly faced with unprecedented demand. They had to ship millions of records to meet it. The album Moody Blue, his last studio album, was already gold before he died. In the weeks after his death, it shot to multi-platinum status. How many of those were panicked orders from stores that were then sold, and how many were speculative orders that maybe sat in a stockroom? The RIAA's numbers are based on the former, but it's hard to know for sure. The paper trail from that chaotic period is not always clear. Today, the RIAA system has been updated to be more precise, especially with the move to digital sales and point-of-sale data. But for the vast majority of Elvis's career and posthumous awards, they were based on this older shipped and not returned model. It leaves a gray area. We are trusting the accounting of the record labels, whose primary interest was in promoting their artist, not in historical accuracy. What we still don't know, how many of Elvis's RIAA certifications, particularly from the 1970s, were based on initial shipments that may have seen significant returns later on. Are the audit records from RCA's applications for Elvis's awards from the 60s and 70s publicly available for review? Did the RIAA ever revoke an award if returns eventually dropped an album's net sales below the certification threshold? How much did the practice of loading, shipping more units to stores than they could realistically sell to create buzzy contribute to his award count? Number 14, how did the Diamond Award retroactively change the scoreboard? For the first 20 years of the RIAA Awards, there were only two main levels to celebrate gold for 500,000 albums and platinum for 1 million, which was introduced in 1976. This was the standard. Artists like the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and Elvis were judged by how many platinum albums they had. But in 1999, the RIAA decided to create a new, even more elite award, the Diamond Award. This award was for albums that had sold 10 million copies in the United States. This was a big deal. It created a new top tier of success, and crucially, the RIAA made the award retroactive. They went back and looked at the sales history of every album ever released. Any album that had crossed the 10 million mark at any point could be certified diamond. This single decision had a massive impact on the legacies of classic artists. It was like adding a home run category to baseball 50 years after the game was invented, and then going back to see who qualified. For Elvis, this was a boon. Suddenly, several of his albums were eligible for this new prestigious award. His 1970 compilation, Elvis's Christmas album, was one of the first to be recognized. Over the years, it has been certified diamond, meaning it has sold over 10 million copies. His 2002 compilation, Elvis 31, hits is also rocketed to diamond status, currently certified at 6x platinum, but its component parts and other compilations cross that threshold. The double album Aloha from Hawaii via satellite is 5x platinum, which, because of a rule we'll get to, counts as 10 million units. But the creation of the Diamond Award raises a question of context. Does it retroactively inflate the perception of an album's success? An album that was considered a hit in 1970 at 1 million sales is now viewed through a modern lens where 10 million is the ultimate benchmark. It changes the historical narrative. It also puts an even greater emphasis on the blockbuster compilations and holiday albums, which are the most likely to have the slow, steady sales over decades to reach such a high number. Consider the Elvis's Christmas album. It's a perennial seller. Every year, from October to December, it sells a significant number of copies. It has been doing this for over 50 years. Those sales add up. Reaching 10 million over 5 decades is a different kind of achievement than an album like Michael Jackson's Thriller, selling 10 million copies in just a couple of years. Both are incredible achievements, but they are different. The Diamond Award doesn't distinguish between a flash flood of sales and a slow, steady tide. This retroactive application of a new standard benefits artists with long-lasting, consistent catalog sales, and no one fits that description better than Elvis. It allowed his estate and record label to announce these massive headline-grabbing numbers long after the albums were released, keeping his name in the conversation about the greatest of all time. It was a brilliant marketing move by the RIAA, creating a new way to generate excitement and honor legacy artists. How many artists were suddenly diamond sellers the day the award was created? Did the introduction of the Diamond Award encourage record labels to focus even more on promoting a few key catalog albums instead of an artist's broader body of work? If the Diamond Award had existed in 1970, would it have changed how RCA marketed Elvis's music during his lifetime? How much of the push to get these older albums re-audited and certified diamond came from the RIAA versus the record labels themselves? Number 13. Why are double albums counted as 2 sales? This is one of the most controversial and confusing rules in the RIAA's handbook. If a record has 2 discs, it gets counted twice. For certification purposes, an album is defined by its number of discs. So if a double album sells 1 million copies to the public, the RIAA certifies it as 2x platinum. This has been the rule since the RIAA began, and it has had a huge impact on the certified sales totals of many artists, including Elvis. The most famous example in his catalog is the 1973 live album Aloha from Hawaii via satellite. It was a massive event. The concert was broadcast live around the world, and the subsequent double album was a huge seller. It hit number 1 on the charts. When the RIAA certified its sales, they counted every single copy sold as 2 units. The album is currently certified as 5x platinum. That means 5 million double LP sets were sold. But in RIAA math, that translates to 10 million units. This is why it is often listed alongside his diamond-selling albums. Another significant example is the 1968 box set Worldwide 50 Gold Award Hits Volume. This set is certified platinum, meaning 1 million copies of the box were sold. But that translates to 4 million units in the RIAA's ledger. The RIAA's justification for this rule has to do with the amount of content. They argue that a double album contains twice as much music as a single album, so it should be weighted more heavily. From the record label's perspective, it also cost more to produce and was sold for a higher price. This logic makes some sense, but from a fan's perspective, they bought one product. They made one purchase, saying that one purchase equals 2 or 4. Sales feels like creative accounting. This rule has led to some strange results over the years. Pink Floyd's The Wall, a double album, is certified 23x platinum, meaning it sold 11.5 million copies. The Beatles' White Album, also a double, is certified 24x platinum from 12 million copies sold. It creates an uneven playing field. An artist who released a lot of popular double albums will have a significant advantage in total certified units over an artist who only released single albums, even if they sold the same number of actual products to the same number of people. For Elvis, this rule significantly boosts his overall numbers. When you add up the extra units from albums like Aloha from Hawaii and the Worldwide Gold Hits box set, it adds millions to his total. These are not phantom sales. The records were indeed sold. But the way they are counted gives a slightly distorted view of his standing compared to other artists. It's a quirk in the system, a piece of industry logic that doesn't quite align with common sense. It's a system where 1 plus 1 equals 2, but one purchase can also equal 2. What we still don't know, if all double albums were counted as a single unit, how would the all-time sales rankings change for major artists? Was this rule created to benefit the artists or the record labels who could then boast of higher sales figures? How does this rule apply in the streaming era, where the concept of a discount is obsolete? Is a digital album with over a certain number of tracks or runtime counted as a double? Has there ever been a serious challenge or attempt to change this long-standing RIA rule? Number 12, can we trust sales figures from the 1950s? Elvis Presley's career exploded in 1956. This was the dawn of rock and roll. It was also a very different world for the music business. There were no barcodes. There were no centralized, computerized sales tracking systems like SoundScan, which was only introduced in 1991. So, how does anyone, including the RIA, know for sure how many copies of Heartbreak Hotel or the album Elvis Presley were actually sold back in 1956? The answer is it's very difficult. The process was entirely reliant on paper records and accounting from RCA. To get a gold certification in the early days, the award was created in 1958. RCA would have had to submit sales figures and shipping invoices to an independent auditor. That auditor would then verify the numbers and submit them to the RIA. The whole system was built on trust in the record label's bookkeeping. This presents a few problems. First, record keeping in the 1950s was not what it is today. Records could be lost, damaged, or simply inaccurate. Second, the definition of a sale was, as we've discussed, based on shipments to stores, not final sales to customers. This was especially true for singles. A song could be a massive radio hit, and the label would ship hundreds of thousands of copies to meet the perceived demand. But how many of those were ultimately sold versus how many sat in a bargain bin? And Ernst Jorgensen, in his definitive book Elvis Presley: A Life in Music, has done some of the most extensive research into RCA's internal documents and sales records. His work provides the most detailed picture we have, but even he acknowledges the challenges of pinning down exact numbers from that era. The further back you go, the fuzzier the data gets. Furthermore, the awards themselves were often applied for long after the fact. The RIA's Gold and Platinum program started in 1958. Elvis's biggest early hits like Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel came out in 1956. Their sales from those first 2 years were only certified retroactively. RCA had to go back through their books from 2 years prior to apply for the awards. The first album ever certified gold by the RIA was the soundtrack to Oklahoma. Elvis's first gold album certification was for Elvis's Golden Records in 1958. His debut album, Elvis Presley, from 1956, wasn't certified gold until 1966, a full decade after its release. Why the delay? It often came down to a label deciding it was worth the effort and expense of the audit to get the award, usually to coincide with a new promotional campaign. This means that many of the awards for his earliest, most iconic work are based on decade-old accounting. We are trusting that RCA's 1966 audit of their 1956 sales figures was completely accurate. This isn't to say the numbers were deliberately faked, but the potential for error, for miscalculation, for lost documents is significant. It's like trying to reconstruct a company's financial records from 70 years ago using only old file cabinets. You can get a good picture, but you might miss some details. The foundation of his entire sales legacy rests on this early pre-computerized data. What we still don't know, what percentage of Elvis's 1950s singles and albums were certified in the 1950s versus decades later. Are the original notarized accounting documents that RCA submitted to the RIAA for these 1950s releases still archived and accessible? How did the RIAA's auditing standards in the 1950s and 60s compare to the more rigorous standards of today? Were there any disputes or re-evaluations of these early sales figures as accounting methods improved over time? Number 11. Who was Colonel Tom Parker, and was he a reliable source? You cannot talk about Elvis Presley without talking about Colonel Tom Parker. He was his manager, his promoter, his mentor, and some would say his exploiter. The Colonel was a master showman, a carnival barker at heart. His genius was in marketing and promotion. His primary goal was always to make money, and a huge part of his strategy involved creating and maintaining the myth of Elvis as the biggest star in the world. This meant constantly talking about record-breaking sales. The famous 1 billion records sold claim largely originated from the publicity machine run by Parker and RCA. They started floating huge unverified numbers in the press as early as the late 1960s. After Elvis's death, this number became a standard part of his legend. It was a fantastic marketing tool. It sounded definitive, it put him in a category all by himself, but it was never backed up by audited, certified figures. It was a promotional number, not an accounting one. The Colonel's relationship with the truth was often flexible. His own life was a fabrication. He was born Andreas Cornelis van Kooik in the Netherlands and was an illegal immigrant in the US, a fact he hid his entire life. This secrecy is often cited as the reason he never allowed Elvis to tour internationally, as he would have needed a passport. This is a man who built his life on secrecy and a carefully crafted image. It's reasonable to question whether he applied the same principles to Elvis's sales figures. In the book Colonel Tom Parker, The Curious Life of Elvis Presley's Eccentric Manager by James L. Dickerson, Parker's business practices are laid bare. He was known for his aggressive deals with RCA, taking an unprecedented 50% commission on many of Elvis's earnings. He was constantly looking for new ways to monetize the brand. Announcing that Elvis had just passed another incredible sales milestone, whether it was strictly verifiable or not, was a key part of that monetization. It kept the hype machine running. So how does this relate to the official RIAA awards? The RIAA process is supposed to be independent of this kind of promotional hype. It requires audited statements, but the person orchestrating the career and likely pushing RCA to apply for these certifications was the Colonel. He understood the value of a gold record, not just as an award, but as a press release. The perception of success was, in his mind, just as important as the success itself. We have to consider the source. When the narrative of Elvis's overwhelming, record-shattering success was being built, the chief architect was a man whose background was in the circus. He knew how to sell a story. The story he sold was of the boy from Tupelo who sold more records than any human in history. It was a great story, but the Colonel was never one to let the boring details of audited accounting get in the way of a great story. While he wasn't directly in charge of the RIAA submission process, his influence over RCA and the entire Elvis enterprise was absolute. Is there any direct evidence, like internal memos from RCA, of Colonel Parker pressuring the label to inflate shipment numbers to secure awards? How much did the 1 billion sold myth, created by Parker, influence the RIAA and the industry's perception of Elvis's sales, potentially leading to less scrutiny? Did Parker's unusual 50% management deal give him more or less influence over the official accounting practices at the record label? After Parker's influence waned and Elvis Presley Enterprises took over, was there a significant change in the rate or pattern of posthumous certifications? Number 10. How did the 2002 LV1S 31 Hits album change the game? In 2002, the world was a very different place for Elvis's music. It had been 25 years since his death. A whole generation had grown up without him. While his legacy was secure, he wasn't at the forefront of pop culture. Then came the LV1S 30 Hits compilation. This was not just another greatest hits album. It was a global marketing event, meticulously planned by BMG the company that then owned RCA's catalog and Elvis Presley Enterprises. The campaign had two key elements. First, the album itself was brilliantly packaged. It gathered all of his number one hits onto a single CD. It was a simple, powerful concept. For a casual fan or someone new to his music, it was the perfect entry point. Second, and more importantly, was the remix. They took a relatively obscure 1968 song, A Little Less Conversation, and gave it to a Dutch DJ named Tom Holkenborg, aka JXL. The resulting remix was a modern, energetic dance track. It was released as a single and became a massive global number one hit. It was everywhere. It was in movies, commercials, notably a Nike World Cup campaign, and on the radio. Suddenly, Elvis was cool again. He was back on top of the charts. The JXL remix drove millions of people into stores to buy the 31 Hits' album it was featured on. The album was an out-of-the-box smash. It debuted at number one in countries all over the world. In the United States, it quickly went gold, then platinum, then multi-platinum. It has since been certified 6x platinum in the US alone. This single release had a profound effect on his posthumous awards. It didn't just add a new multi-million selling album to his catalog, it revitalized his entire back catalog. People who bought the new compilation started exploring his other work. It also set a new template for how to manage his legacy. The estate realized they could actively create new hits and new moments in pop culture. They didn't have to just rely on nostalgia, they could be proactive. This event raises questions about authenticity because it shows how much of the posthumous success is driven by deliberate modern marketing rather than just organic historical interest. The success of Elvis 31 Hits wasn't just about the quality of the old songs. It was about a clever remix, a massive advertising budget, and a perfectly executed global release strategy. It was a 21st century marketing campaign applied to a 20th century artist. The album's success also feeds back into the streaming numbers we discussed earlier. Now, all the streams of A Little Less Conversation, JXL, Remix, and the original hits contribute to this album's ever-growing total. It became a new central hub for his most popular work, and its success is a blend of old magic and modern marketing muscle. It proved that Elvis's sales numbers weren't just a historical fact, they were a living, malleable asset that could be actively managed and grown. What we still don't know, what was the total global marketing budget for the Elvis 31 Hits campaign? How much did sales of Elvis's other catalog albums increase in the year following this release? Did the success of this album lead to a wave of re-audits and applications for new certifications for his older albums? Was the JXL remix the first time the estate had deliberately tried to create a new hit from an old song, or were there earlier, less successful attempts? Number 9. What role do record clubs and mail order sales play? Before the internet, before you could buy music with a single click, there was another way to get records without going to a store. Record clubs, companies like the RCA Victor Record Club, Columbia House, and BMG Music Service were a huge part of the music industry for decades. They worked on a subscription model. You'd sign up and get a certain number of records or tapes for a penny, and then you'd be obligated to buy a few more at full price over the next year. For a catalog artist like Elvis, these clubs were a goldmine. His albums were staples of these services. They were offered in the initial 12 albums for 1-cent deals and were consistently available in the monthly catalogs. This was a massive alternative sales channel that existed alongside traditional retail stores, and sales through these clubs counted towards RIAA certification. The question is, how were these sales tracked and reported? The accounting for record clubs was notoriously complex. There were the introductory offers, the regular price sales, the bonus records, and the negative option billing, where a selection of the month was sent to you automatically unless you specifically told them not to. Figuring out the exact number of net units sold from this tangled system was a challenge. The RIAA had specific rules for record club sales. They could be included in the total for an album certification, but the record label had to provide verified statements from the club operator. Again, this puts a layer of trust between the RIAA and the companies reporting the numbers. And these companies had a vested interest in showing high sales volumes. Some researchers, like author Joseph Morels in his book The Book of Golden Discs, have suggested that record club sales were a significant, and perhaps under-scrutinized, part of the sales equation for many classic artists. For Elvis, whose career was managed by the savvy Colonel Parker, and whose records were released by RCA, which ran its own massive record club, it's almost certain that this was a major sales driver. Albums that might have been slowing down in retail could continue to sell for years through these clubs, quietly adding to their totals. This is another area where the paper trail can be murky. The internal sales reports from Columbia House from 1978 are not exactly easy to come by. But we know the volume was huge. At their peak, these clubs had millions of members and were responsible for a significant percentage of all music sold in the US. How many of Elvis's gold and platinum awards were pushed over the line by these sales? It's impossible to say for certain without a full, independent audit of the club's records. It's a hidden river of sales that flows into the grand total, but its exact depth and current are hard to measure. What we still don't know. What percentage of Elvis's total certified sales came from record clubs versus traditional retail? Are the complete historical sales records from the major record clubs archived and available to researchers? Were the auditing standards for record club sales as strict as those for retail shipments? Did the RIA ever find significant discrepancies between the sales reported by record clubs and the record labels? Number 8. Why is there such a huge gap between US sales and global claims? We started with this, and it's one of the biggest questions of all. The RIA has certified Elvis with roughly 146.5 million album sales in the United States. His estate and Sony Music often quote the figure of over 1 billion records sold worldwide. Let's be generous and say that records include singles, which the RIA certifies separately. Elvis has about 50 million certified single sales in the US. That brings his total certified US sales to just under 200 million units. So, where are the other 800 million? The simple answer is that the 1 billion number includes sales from every other country in the world. The problem is there is no global RIA. There is no single independent body that has reliably tracked and audited global music sales for the past 70 years. Each country has its own certification system, if it has one at all. Some countries have very reliable systems like the BPI in the UK or ARIA in Australia. Others have less transparent systems or had no system at all for much of Elvis's career. To get to 1 billion, you have to rely on a patchwork of official certifications, unverified claims from local record labels, and a whole lot of estimation. RCA had international divisions all over the world. The sales figures they reported back to the US headquarters in the 1960s and 70s are the primary source for these global claims. We are once again trusting the internal accounting of the company that stood to profit from the numbers being as high as possible. This isn't to say he wasn't a massive global star. He was. He sold millions of records in the UK, Germany, Japan, and Australia. But getting to 1 billion is incredibly difficult. For comparison, the Beatles are often cited as the only other act to have reached this milestone. Their certified sales in the US are higher than Elvis's 183 million albums. They also toured the world extensively, which Elvis famously did not. This makes the claim of him outselling them globally a bit harder to substantiate. The 1 billion claim feels more like a marketing slogan than a hard, verifiable fact. It was a number that Colonel Parker likely pulled out of thin air, and it has been repeated so many times that it's become accepted as truth. It's an important part of the Elvis legend. But when you try to break it down and find the data, it evaporates. You're left with the certified numbers, which are huge and impressive, and then a vast foggy expanse of claimed international sales. The estate and the record label have never provided a country-by-country, audited breakdown of sales that adds up to 1 billion. They don't have to. The number exists outside the world of formal certification. It's a piece of folklore, but it has a real-world effect. It shapes our perception of his place in history. It puts him on a pedestal, and it makes questioning the authenticity of his awards seem almost sacrilegious. What we still don't know, what is the most credible research-based estimate of Elvis's actual worldwide sales, and who has done that research? Has any independent body ever attempted a global audit of his sales by combining data from all national certification bodies? How much of the 1 billion claim is based on sales in markets with historically unreliable or non-existent sales tracking? If you only count sales from countries with official RIA equivalent certification bodies, what would his worldwide total be? Number 7, how are sales of movie soundtracks really counted? Elvis Presley was a movie star. He starred in 31 feature films. For most of the 1960s, his career was focused more on Hollywood than on music. A key part of the movie-making formula was the soundtrack album. For almost every movie, there was an accompanying LP. These albums were not always his best work, but they sold incredibly well, at least initially. Albums like Blue Hawaii, GI Blues, and Roostabout were multi-million sellers. This brings up a unique question about his sales figures. How intertwined were the album sales with the success of the films? The movies were, in effect, feature-length commercials for the soundtracks. You saw the movie, you heard the songs, you went out and bought the record. This was a brilliant business model, perfected by Colonel Parker. The sales of these soundtracks are, of course, counted by the Riyadh, just like any other album. Blue Hawaii is certified 3x platinum. GI Blues's is 2x platinum. These are significant numbers that contribute to his overall total. But it raises a question of artistic versus commercial achievement. Were people buying these albums because they were great pieces of music, or because they were souvenirs of the movie experience? Furthermore, the quality of these soundtracks famously declined as the 60s wore on. Albums like Harum Scarum and Paradise, Hawaiian Style are often cited by critics as low points in his career. Yet they too were certified gold. This speaks to the power of the Elvis brand and the movie machine behind him. He was contractually obligated to deliver these albums, and RCA was obligated to release them. They would ship 500,000 copies to stores, secure the gold record, and move on to the next film. This model of selling music makes Elvis's catalog unique. Few other major artists of his stature have a body of work so dominated by film soundtracks of varying quality. When we compare his total album sales to an artist like the Beatles, who focused almost exclusively on studio albums, it's not an apples-to-apples comparison. A significant portion of Elvis's certified sales comes from these movie tie-in products. This isn't to say the sales aren't real. They are. People bought the records. But the context is different. The sales were driven by a different engine. It was less about musical innovation and more about a complete entertainment package. The authenticity question here is not about the numbers themselves, but what the numbers represent. Do they represent a deep connection to the music or a more superficial connection to the film star? For the RIA, a sale is a sale, but for a cultural historian, the distinction matters. What we still don't know is there a clear correlation between a movie's box office success and the sales of its soundtrack album. How did the sales of his soundtracks hold up over time compared to his studio albums from the same period? If you were to remove all 20-plus movie soundtracks from his discography, how would his total certified album sales be affected? Did RCA ever use special promotions, like bundling movie tickets with album purchases? That might have blurred the lines of the sales data. Number 6, what exactly happened to the Sun Records sales data? Before RCA, before the fame and the movies, there was Sun Records. From 1954 to 1955, a young Elvis Presley recorded a handful of songs at a small studio in Memphis, run by Sam Phillips. These recordings, including That's All Right, Blue Moon of Kentucky, and Mystery Train, are arguably his most important and influential work. They are the records that started it all. In November 1955, Sam Phillips sold Elvis's contract, along with all his existing master tapes, to RCA for the then unheard of sum of $35,000. From that point on, RCA owned everything. They immediately began re-releasing the Sun singles on the RCA label. This is where the sales history gets complicated. The original pressings on the Sun label were regional hits. They sold well in the South, but they weren't massive national sellers. The real volume of sales for these songs came after RCA put their marketing power behind them. So when we look at the sales figures for a song like Mystery Train, are we counting the initial Sun sales? Or just the RCA sales? Or both? The record keeping at a small independent label like Sun in the mid-1950s was likely not as meticulous as at a corporate giant like RCA. Sam Phillips was more focused on finding the next great sound than on detailed accounting. It's very likely that the exact number of records he pressed and sold is lost to history. Any sales figures for the Sun material are almost certainly based on the records sold by RCA after they acquired the catalog. This means that the sales history of his foundational work has a blind spot right at the beginning. The RCA could only account for the records they manufactured and sold. The original Sun sales are a historical footnote. While they might not amount to a huge number compared to his later success, their omission is significant. It's like starting a biography in the second chapter. Furthermore, RCA has repackaged these 20 or so Sun recordings countless times over the decades. They appear on box sets, compilations, and special releases. A dedicated album of this material, The Sun Sessions, was released in 1976 and became a critical favorite. Its sales are tracked, but the sales of the original singles in their original context are much harder to pin down. The awards and certifications are all based on the life these songs had after they left their original home. What we still don't know, has anyone ever attempted a forensic accounting of Sun Records' business records to estimate Elvis's sales on that label? When RCA bought the masters, did they also acquire the sales ledgers and business documents related to those records? How many of the Sun era recordings were certified gold as singles after being re-released by RCA? Does the RIA have any specific guidelines for how to handle sales of material that was originally released on an independent label before being acquired by a major one? Number 5, how did the death boom affect the numbers? On August 16th, 1977, Elvis Presley died. In the hours, days, and weeks that followed, something unprecedented happened. The world rushed out to buy his records. It was a massive global outpouring of grief and nostalgia. Record pressing plants that had been slowing down production of his albums were suddenly running 24 hours a day to meet the demand. RCA chairman David Sarnoff famously stated that they sold more Elvis records in the days after his death than they had in the entire previous year. This death boom had a seismic impact on his sales totals and posthumous awards. Albums that had been languishing in the catalog were suddenly back on the charts. His last studio album, Moody Blue, shot to #1. Compilations flew off the shelves. It was a commercial phenomenon born from a tragedy. The authenticity question here is about the nature of the demand. This was not a normal sales cycle. It was a sudden emotional spike. RCA was in the position of having to estimate the demand and ship millions of records to stores that were screaming for a product. This is a scenario ripe for overshipping. Stores not willing to be caught without Elvis records likely ordered far more than they could ultimately sell. So when we see an album like Welcome to My World, a compilation released in early 1977, get certified gold and platinum in the months after he died, we have to consider the context. How many of those certified sales were shipments to retailers during that frantic period? And how many of those records were eventually returned or sold at a deep discount? According to the RIA rules, as long as the net sales stayed above the threshold, the award was valid. But the circumstances were extraordinary. This period, from late 1977 through 1978, saw a flurry of new certifications for his catalog. It was a massive one-time injection of sales that has padded his numbers ever since. It's a sensitive topic as it's tied to a moment of genuine public mourning. But from a business perspective, it was also a massive, chaotic, and difficult to track sales event. The documentation and accounting from that specific frantic period are crucial to understanding his overall posthumous totals, and it may not be as clean as the numbers suggest. What we still don't know. What were the return rates for Elvis records shipped in the last 4 months of 1977 compared to a normal sales period? Are there internal RCA documents that detail the sheer chaos and production challenges of trying to meet that sudden demand? How many new compilations did RCA rush release in the year after his death to capitalize on the boom, and what were their sales? Did the RIA apply any special scrutiny or modify its auditing process for certifications during this unprecedented sales surge? Number 4, who is actually auditing the auditors? The entire RIA certification system is built on a foundation of independent auditing. A record label can't just call up the RIA and say, hey, we sold 1 million copies of the new Elvis album. They have to hire an independent accounting firm. This firm is supposed to go through the label's books and the sales reports, the shipping invoices, the return statements, and verify that the numbers are accurate. They then prepare a formal report which is submitted with the application for the award. This sounds good on paper. It creates a system of checks and balances, but it raises a simple question. Who audits the auditors? The accounting firm is hired and paid by the record label. While these firms have a professional reputation to uphold, there is an inherent conflict of interest. Their client, the record label, has a clear desire for the audit to come out in their favor. This is not to suggest widespread fraud. Most accounting firms operate with high ethical standards. But there can be gray areas. How do you account for promotional copies? What about records shipped to overseas military bases? The rules can be complex, and the interpretation of those rules can sometimes be flexible. In the book Hitmen by Frederick Dannon, which explores the excesses of the music industry in the 70s and 80s, the practice of using aggressive accounting to achieve sales awards is well documented. For Elvis's posthumous awards, this is particularly relevant. When Sony Music decides in 2015 that it wants to get a new certification for a 1965 album, they hire an auditor. That auditor has to piece together a sales history that spans 50 years. They have to look at old pre-computerized records from RCA, data from the CD era at BMG, and modern digital sales and streaming data from Sony. It's a massive, complex forensic accounting job. The potential for error or for making favorable interpretations of incomplete data is high. The RIAA does have its own compliance team. They can review the submitted audits and, in some cases, conduct their own investigations if something looks suspicious. But they are a small organization overseeing a massive industry. They can't possibly scrutinize every single line of every audit. For the most part, they have to trust that the system is working, that the independent auditors are doing their job correctly and impartially. But for an observer asking about authenticity, that layer of trust is where the questions arise. What we still don't know, how often does the RIAA reject a certification application due to problems with the submitted audit? Are the full, detailed audit reports submitted by the labels ever made public? Has a record label ever been publicly sanctioned by the RIAA for submitting inaccurate or misleading sales data? What are the specific qualifications and standards the RIAA requires for an accounting firm to be approved to conduct these audits? Number 3, why does the RIAA certify budget compilations? Walk into any big box store or truck stop, and you'll likely find a rack of cheap CDs. On that rack, you will almost certainly find an Elvis Presley compilation. These are not the big official releases like 30 Ohm Hits is. These are budget albums. They might have titles like Elvis Rock and Roll Hero or The King 18 Classic Tracks. They usually have 10 to 20 songs, feature public domain artwork, and sell for $5 or $10. These albums are a huge, often overlooked part of his sales, and the RIAA certifies them. There are dozens of these budget compilations in his official RIAA certification list. Many of them are certified gold, and some are even platinum. This is a massive source of posthumous awards. The record label can take the same batch of hits, put them on a new cheap CD with a different cover, sell it through a different distribution channel like a supermarket chain, and get a whole new award for it. This practice brings the authenticity question into sharp focus. Is a gold record for a $5 CD sold at Walmart the same achievement as a gold record for a full-priced, newly recorded studio album in 1971? The RIAA says yes, 500,000 units are 500,000 units, but the context and the commercial intent are completely different. These budget releases are the ultimate example of repackaging. They are designed to extract maximum value from the old hits. They are not aimed at serious collectors. They are impulse buys. They are churning the same material over and over again for a different segment of the market. And each churn can result in a new award that gets added to the official tally. This significantly inflates his total number of gold and platinum albums, making his discography look even more successful than it already was. This isn't illegal or even against the rules, it's just smart business on the part of the record label. But it does devalue the meaning of a gold or platinum award. If you can get a gold record for what is essentially a low-effort, low-cost repackaging of old material, it makes the awards earned by original studio albums seem less special. It turns the award system partly into a volume game. The artist with the most beloved and easily repackaged catalog will inevitably rack up the most awards over time. What we still don't know, how many of Elvis's total gold and platinum album awards are for these budget line compilations versus original studio, live, or primary compilation albums. Is there a minimum retail price an album must have to be eligible for RIAA certification? Does the RIAA differentiate in its database between a frontline release and a budget release? How many other legacy artists have a comparable number of certified budget compilations? Number 2, were the rules changed to help legacy artists? The RIA's rules have not been static. They have evolved over time. They added the Platinum Award in 1976. They added the Diamond Award in 1999. They started counting streams in 2016. Each of these changes was a response to a changing industry, but it's worth asking were some of these changes made, consciously or unconsciously, with an eye toward helping to promote the industry's most valuable assets, so the back catalogs of its biggest stars. Consider the creation of the Platinum Award in 1976. By that point, album sales were much higher than they had been in the 1950s. A million-selling album was still a huge achievement, but it was becoming more common. Creating a new, higher tier gave the labels a new promotional tool. It was also made retroactive, allowing them to go back and certify classic albums from the 60s that had long since passed the million-seller mark. This generated a new round of publicity for artists like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and, of course, Elvis. The introduction of streaming into album awards in 2016 is another key example. By then, album sales were in steep decline. If the RIA had stuck to a pure sales model, the number of new Gold and Platinum awards would have slowed to a trickle. Incorporating streaming was a necessary move to stay relevant, but a major side effect of this change was that it massively benefited legacy artists with huge, universally known catalogs. An artist like Elvis, whose songs are constantly in rotation on streaming playlists and movies and on the radio, gets a huge, continuous boost from the SEAT formula. Every casual listen contributes to his totals. A new artist has to build that kind of catalog recognition from scratch. In a way, the new rules are geared towards celebrating sustained long-term popularity, which is the very definition of a legacy artist. This is not to suggest a conspiracy. The RIA's stated goal is to accurately reflect how people are consuming music. But the consequences of their rule changes have consistently benefited the estates and record labels who manage these iconic catalogs. The new rules make it easier for old albums to achieve new awards, which creates headlines, which drives interest, which leads to more streams and sales. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. The game has changed, and the new rules seem to favor the players who have been on the field the longest. What, we still don't know. When the RIA was debating the inclusion of streams for album awards, were the potential effects on legacy artists a major part of the discussion. Have the RIA's rule changes ever disadvantaged legacy artists in any way? Is there any evidence that record labels lobbied the RIA for specific rule changes that would help them better monetize their back catalogs? What percentage of all RIA certifications in the last 5 years have gone to albums released more than 20 years ago? Number one, what does authentic even mean anymore? This is the final and most important question. After looking at the streaming rules, the double albums, the repackaging, the historical gaps, and the marketing machinery, what does an authentic award for Elvis even look like? The word itself seems to lose its meaning. Is the 6X Platinum Award for Elvis's Golden Records authentic? It was first released in 1958. It has been on the market for over 60 years. Its sales are a mix of vinyl sold in the 50s, 8 tracks in the 70s, CDs in the 90s, and streams in the 2020s. The award represents a slow, steady accumulation of sales across every technological format the music industry has ever known. In that sense, its authenticity comes from its incredible endurance. Is the 6X Platinum Award for ELV1's 31 hits is authentic? It was a product of a massive, modern marketing campaign. It was designed from the ground up to be a blockbuster. Its success was part art, part science. Its authenticity comes from its ability to capture a specific cultural moment in 2002 and introduce the music to a new generation. The problem is that the RIA treats both of these and hundreds of other awards as equal. They are all just lines in a ledger. A gold award is a gold award. But as we've seen, how an album gets to that 500,000 mark can vary wildly. It can be a burst of passionate buying in 1956. It can be a slow trickle of sales to record club members through the 80s. It can be a mountain of streams from a viral video in 2024. The posthumous awards of Elvis Presley are not a simple measure of his popularity. They are a complex tapestry woven from his incredible talent, his fans' enduring loyalty, decades of savvy marketing, a series of convenient rule changes, and some very creative accounting. The numbers are real, in the sense that they are certified by the official industry body according to its own rules. But whether they are authentic, in the way a fan might understand that word, as a direct, unmediated measure of people buying a record they loved, is a much more difficult question to answer. The awards are as much a product of the industry as they are of the artist. Perhaps the lingering questions are the point. The legend of Elvis is so big, so monumental, that it can't be contained by simple numbers. His impact is found in the music itself, not in the shiny discs on the wall. The awards are just a reflection, and like any reflection, it can sometimes be distorted. What we still don't know, if we could start from scratch today with perfect modern sales data for every format, what would his true, undeniable sales figures be? Does the endless pursuit of new certifications and sales records ultimately serve or diminish an artist's legacy? Will there ever be a point where the industry agrees on a final, historical tally for artists like Elvis? Or will the numbers just keep growing forever? And the biggest question of all, if Elvis himself were here today, would he even care about the numbers, or would he just want to play the music?